Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 2020 PCF Women in Science Forum. My name is Misha Beltran. I am here with my colleague and friend, Dr. Lorelei Mucci, and we are here on behalf of this year's organizing committee. For those of you that have not attended this event in the past, this is the fifth year of the PCF Women in Science Forum. It started because we had recognized that there were more and more women in prostate cancer research, but still some were having a hard time finding role models and mentors in the field. And we thought, wouldn't it be nice to have an informal venue before the PCF annual retreat where we could just get to know each other, recognizing that women do have unique challenges in science, medicine, and research. And it's really evolved since then. And there's been a lot of great sessions and panels. And here are a few pictures from the last few years. And so I'll really truly miss the personal interactions that this forum has always brought. I do think it is a unique year, and in this virtual format, we do have an opportunity to broaden our reach, and I think we have more participants this year than usual, and I would really encourage you all to encourage your colleagues, including your male colleagues, because we really need everyone at the table when we want to think about issues that affect women in science. So I'll turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Mucci. But before I do, I just want to say thank you to the Prostate Cancer Foundation for supporting this event every year and for supporting women in science.
Yeah, thank you so much, Misha, and thank you to all of you who are taking part in this fifth annual event. It really has grown tremendously. I think at the last count, there were more than 250 people registered for this Women in Science event, and we have an extraordinary agenda with two fantastic women presenting as keynote speakers. We are going to have a really exciting panel discussion where we're going to be talking about diversity and inclusion in cancer research leadership. We're also really honored to have a group of high school STEM students led by one of PCF's own young investigators, Brandon Mahal. His brother and members of his school are going to be here, including an exciting musical presentation. And then we're going to be giving our first ever PCF Women in Science Above and Beyond Award. And then finally, we're going to have our breakout session. So thank you all for participating. And again, also, I'd love to thank PCF for really being partners in leadership in supporting women in science. So thank you so much. It's truly an honor to have Dr. Dara Richardson Heron as our keynote speaker for this year's Prostate Cancer Foundation Women in Science Forum. Dr. Richardson Heron has led an extraordinary career as a physician and leader who's been dedicated to patient advocacy. She received her medical training at NYU Medical Center and Bellevue Medical Center. Until 2020, she served as the Chief Engagement Officer and Scientific Executive for NIH's All of Us research program, which is really an extraordinary initiative to enroll more than 1 million volunteers in a landmark effort to advance innovative health research. And as a cancer epidemiologist, I'm particularly excited about the work that Dr. Richardson Heron has done to enhance diversity of the study. Since 2020, she has served as Pfizer's new Chief Patient Officer. And in this role, she leads initiatives to ensure that the patients and communities are at the center of Pfizer's research. The overall goal of this is to help people live longer, healthier, and more productive lives. It's been exciting for me to learn about Dr. Richardson Heron and the numerous awards that she's received, including 21 Leaders for the 21st Century and the Distinguished Alumni Award from Barnard College, where she completed her undergraduate training. So thank you so much, Dr. Richardson Heron, for being our keynote speaker this year.
Well, hello, everyone, and thank you so much, Dr. Mucci, for that warm introduction. I am deeply honored to be surrounded by so many amazing women and a few good men in science. I'm also extremely grateful to Howard Sewell and the Prostate Cancer Foundation for inviting me to join you for this great forum. I know for sure that I could learn a great deal from each of the amazing participants here today. So it's quite humbling to have been asked to provide insight and inspiration to so many women of incredible achievement. As my parents always said, to whom much is given, much is required. So please know that I'm going to do my best to leave it all on the court. Now, I've been asked to talk a bit about the current state of affairs of women in science, to share information about my own personal career trajectory, and also to leave you with a few of my personal experiences and thoughts about how I have navigated the tightrope as a woman in science. And it's my fervent hope that something I say today will convince each of you, no matter where you are in your personal or career journey, to run your own race and stay the course, always remembering to plant the seeds of triumph as you continue to lead and achieve greatness in all that you do. So let's get into the big picture, where women stand in science today. And before I begin, I just want to say that I'm particularly delighted that we have STEM students in the audience, because despite all of the focus on STEM, the big picture, simply put, is that while great progress has been made, there are just not nearly enough young women making the choice to go into STEM. And equally important is the reality that there are far too many great women leaving the field. But first, you have to know I'm a storyteller at heart, so I have to tell a story. I've always loved to read. Even as a young girl, I enjoyed curling up with a good book, and I still do. I'm a bit old fashioned in that way. But given my interest in science from early on, I often read books that compiled short biographies of famous women, especially women in science. You know the heroes: Marie Curie, the physicist who conducted pioneering research on radioactivity along with her husband, the first woman ever to receive a Nobel Prize in 1903. And you know what I like about her? She didn't stop there. She became the first person to win the Nobel Prize twice, after winning a second in 1911 for chemistry, the discovery and research of two elements, polonium and radium. And guess what? She did much of this during a time when it was still illegal for women to receive higher education. That's pretty amazing. And then, of course, you have Jane Goodall, known for her years of living among chimpanzees in Tanzania to create one of the most amazing and impactful studies of primates in modern times. And we certainly can't forget Rosalind Franklin, whose research was the first to demonstrate the basic dimensions of DNA strands. And in fact, her data was used by James Watson and Francis Crick to get their research on the DNA model across the finish line. And they, along with Maurice Wilkins, were awarded with a Nobel Prize in 1962. But though she died in 1958 of ovarian cancer, Rosalind Franklin was not awarded posthumously. But she certainly should have been, because it was her work that led to the actual discovery. So now, if you fast forward, if a young girl reaches for books on science and women in science today, she's likely to find essentially the same group of biographies that I found more than 4 decades ago. And perhaps if she really does some deep searching, she might see that the publishers have added a few new entries, like Mae Jemison, the first African American in space, or just recently Katherine Johnson, Dorothy Vaughan, and Mary Jackson, whose work in physics, space flight, and engineering at NASA literally helped humankind achieve new heights, as you may have read or seen in the book and movie Hidden Figures. But where are the others? Where's American chemist Alice Ball, the first African American woman and the first woman to receive a master's degree from the University of Hawaii? The university's first female chemistry professor, who at the ripe old age of 23 developed a groundbreaking treatment for leprosy that was used and the best treatment for leprosy until the 1940s. Where's Patricia Bath, who revolutionized the treatment for cataracts? And when will the publishers begin to memorialize the incredible trailblazing prostate cancer researchers like Dr. Mucci, who's in our midst today, or Dr. Hashima Beltran, or Dr. Heather Change, all of whom are amazing women who are working in prostate cancer. And that's just the top of the alphabet. The answer as to why we don't hear more about trailblazing women in science is really multifaceted. It's complex, and might I add, it's also disturbing. But it certainly speaks to the realities of how women in science are portrayed and perhaps undervalued in our society. And there's no escaping the tyranny of the numbers. When it comes to women in science, a smaller base means many fewer opportunities and many fewer standouts in the field. And the reality is, despite our best efforts, we continue to face a daunting STEM gap 20 years after the acronym STEM entered into our lexicon. It's hard to believe that women are still earning STEM degrees at essentially the same rates as they were 20 years ago. And while women are nearly 50% of the US labor market, they are just 28% of those employed in STEM fields. And not surprisingly, the gap is most acute for Black and Latinx women, who represent only 5% of employed STEM professionals. Now, I know you may think I'm biased, and admittedly I am. However, I can very objectively say, based simply on the many accomplishments of the women in science I've already mentioned, that the world needs and would greatly benefit from many more women in science. Because we know that adding diversity will enable us to benefit from input from a much larger portion of the population. And we know this also results in creativity, innovation that is fueled by different perspectives about issues and how we solve them. Now, to use another analogy, if you want to fill a bathtub, you have to do more than just turn on the faucet. You must also close the drain. And we know that even if we had the ability to turn on the faucet of women entering the STEM fields at full blast, we know that women are still much more likely to drain out of STEM careers than men. And most often, women do so just before the primes of their careers. That is, after a full decade of professional experience. And I don't know about you, but I don't think that's okay. In fact, it's just not okay. Now, it's convenient for those of us who want to make this a non problem to chalk all of this up to women's traditional roles in childbearing and childcare. And it's true that approximately 43% of women STEM professionals do leave their jobs within 4 to 7 years after the birth of a child. But so do 23% of men. I mean, this is certainly a stunning indictment of a system that is not so kind to people who want to have personal lives. The problem, however, goes deeper. Years of research has shown that many women, in particular in STEM fields, leave their roles not just because of their traditional roles in the family, but also because of other more insidious factors such as isolation, negative work environments, implicit bias, or even outright discrimination, sexism, lack of opportunity, coaching, mentoring, and counseling. Now, Zoom is kind of remarkable because right now I can actually feel many of you nodding your heads in agreement. And of course, I didn't just stop by to highlight problems. My big picture raises the question, what can we actually do about this? What are the solutions? And I think we can all agree that there are many worthy ideas and programs that have been designed to increase the supply of women choosing science. So I'm really going to focus my thoughts today on what we can do to keep women in science, to keep women working in science. Now, first, let me acknowledge that there's no one size fits all solution or experience in practically anything. We know that experiences in STEM vary considerably by gender, race, and education. We also know that minorities have found the fields less welcoming, and in surveys are much more likely to say that they faced significant career obstacles due to their gender. But you know what? No matter how you slice it, the STEM playing field is uneven. And the factors mentioned earlier certainly play a key role in discouraging long term commitments to the field, particularly for women. And that's troubling because longevity leads to seniority and advancement into management and leadership positions that are likely more rewarding and also, very importantly, have the potential to contribute to culture change. But that can't happen if women scientists leave the field early. So Let's just talk a little bit about solutions. We clearly need a structural change, including widespread policies that encourage and don't penalize men or women, for that matter, for wanting to have to fulfill personal and professional lives. We also need cultural change. In particular, we need to take steps to make a significant impact as it relates to the stereotyping of roles, the toxic work environments that are often cited, and the often what I call paternalistic micromanagement of women, especially women who rise to leadership roles. Now, we know that changes of heavily ingrained behaviors may not happen overnight, but in all honesty, the clock has been ticking for quite some time now. There have been many overnights, and in my opinion, the only way to make substantive change is to hold those who violate the rules accountable for their actions. Because if we don't, during this seemingly never ending transition, where women in science are asked to walk a tightrope, trying to change the system from within without surrendering our souls in the process, it's going to be nearly impossible for some of us not to get weary and drain out of the STEM pipeline. And that's not what we want. We must all keep our balance on that tightrope. We must stay in the game so that we and our allies can change it. We must be in the room or we'll be on the menu. And we must have a voice and we must use it strategically. So, as a seasoned woman in science, my thoughts today are shaped by a career that I summarize as a physician by training and an advocate by choice. I've used my time, my talents, and my expertise to pursue my personal quest to make the world a better place, helping all people maximize their potential. And also, I wanted to be an effective advocate with and for those who need someone to stand up for them. So, truly, the first leg of my personal race was making sure that I earned my credentials as a doctor. My parents will tell you that by the ripe old age of 2, I told them and anyone else who would listen that I wanted to be a doctor. I was passionate about it. That was my story, and I stuck to it. It was one of the few times in my life that I haven't had a plan B. And just a note here to the STEM students: always follow your passion, but always have a plan B. Um, Thankfully for me, I achieved my goal. At age 17, I traveled from Oklahoma City, my birthplace, to New York City to begin my career, starting out as a biology major at Barnard College. And I chose Barnard because Barnard at the time had the highest percentage of graduates who successfully matriculated into medical school. Again, I was laser focused on achieving one of my career goals, and that was to become a physician. But I selected Barnard also because of Barnard's incomparable and rich legacy as a leader in higher education for women. I remember distinctly being told at my freshman orientation, and I quote, Barnard women changed the world and the way we think about it, end quote. I have to tell you, it was at that point when I knew for sure that I had chosen the right place. And I also chose to study medicine at New York University because I wanted to learn about healthcare and preventive medicine in a dynamic urban center, and also at a place where I could care for a diverse array of people who presented with an equally diverse set of medical challenges. And I did my residency at NYU Medical Center in Bellevue, the oldest public hospital in the United States and one of its largest. And it was an inflection point, shaping me both as a physician, as a human being, and as a person. Because you know what? I had studied healthcare disparities in academic settings, but at Bellevue, I actually saw how these disparities played out in a real way in human suffering. I mean, many of my patients, through no fault of their own, presented with late stage diseases, primarily because they just didn't have access to high quality care. And trust me, it was devastating to see people suffer and even die from diseases that are either easily treated in their early stages or altogether preventable. It was a spur to a life of patient advocacy, much of it aimed at doing what I can do to eliminate health disparities. Now, the second leg of my personal race called for a bold move for me to figure out how to chart a non traditional path as a physician. Because at the time, once you got your doctorate of medicine, you opened up a private practice. But that wasn't what I wanted to do. I felt that by charting a non traditional path, I could best contribute to both the medical profession and to our larger society. And I realized that the change I was determined to lead would require me to think big, well beyond the clinical settings that were the norm at the time. So I followed my passion, not only to work on decreasing the burden of disease, but also to connect with and be an advocate with and for people with little or no access to high quality healthcare. Hence my description of myself as a physician by trade and an advocate by choice. And my decision to pursue a healthcare leadership and advocacy set me on a 25 plus year career path that has spanned the corporate, academic, government, and non for profit sectors. And experiences in leadership at Con Edison, United Cerebral Palsy, Susan G. Komen, and the YWCA of the USA taught me that effective leadership and advocacy is rooted in effective strategy, and it's largely dependent on the ability to lead through influence and inspiration, no matter where you stand on the organization chart. And now today, I have the honor and the responsibility of serving as Pfizer's chief patient officer and at a global biopharma company. And I'm determined to use my time, my talent, my experience, and to continue my lifelong work to take healthcare leadership and patient advocacy to new levels. I remain committed to reducing the occurrence and impact of healthcare disparities. And each day, I firmly keep in mind the words of the late Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., and I quote, of all the forms of inequality, injustice in healthcare is the most shocking and inhumane, end quote. Now, some might consider joining a major biopharma company as an unusual choice for a physician and healthcare advocate, but I don't. And I'm not at all naive to some of the concerns and perceptions that people have about biopharma companies. But as a caregiver, as a physician, and as a person whose family and patients' lives have been enhanced, extended, or even saved by biopharmaceuticals, and most importantly, as a 23-year and counting breast cancer survivor myself, who is alive and well today because of quote unquote breakthroughs that change patients' lives, end quote. I have always been grateful for those on the front lines in the pharmaceutical industry developing treatments that have led to major advances in health and wellness and longevity. And I also took the role because I am energized by Pfizer's commitment to becoming the world's most patient-centric company. And I'm really excited about being a leader at a global company with global resources, with incredible capacity for what I call end-to-end advocacy. And by that, I mean commitment to advocacy that is not bound by a research phase or therapeutic area or geography or time. It's fully end to end, from the earliest moments of discovery to the last time one of our medicines is prescribed to a patient anywhere in the world. Now, to be fair, even I have to question my timing because I joined Pfizer just 1 week before the COVID-19 shutdown. Not impeccable timing. But make no mistake about it, I put every lesson I've ever learned in my career about leadership and advocacy to play during my now 7-month tenure at Pfizer. And though I've long been active in health justice, the enormous tragedy of COVID-19 makes fast progress even more imperative. Because, like with so many other health related disparities, communities of color and vulnerable populations who are already living on the margins are likely to suffer the most. We know that historically and for multifactorial reasons, many individuals have not been sufficiently represented in clinical trials. We also know that race, environment, ethnicity, culture, age, and gender are all factors that may impact responses to medical treatment and patient outcomes. So understandably, I focus much of my time and efforts during my 7 months at Pfizer on helping to facilitate and ensure diversity in the clinical trials for our COVID-19 vaccine candidate as one way to reduce the dramatic disparities we are now seeing with COVID. And certainly the learnings and insight gained here will be leveraged for future clinical trial diversity efforts. But even as important and game-changing as this work is, we know full well that our role in the COVID-19 pandemic doesn't end with ensuring clinical trial diversity and developing and bringing to market a safe and effective vaccine. We have to come to terms with the reality that the healthcare system and researchers of the past have not been kind to African American and other underserved communities. And as a result, many communities of color have little or no trust whatsoever in the healthcare system, due in large part to historic transgressions where people of color were not treated with respect, and in some cases, even harmed. We all know about the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force Tuskegee syphilis study, the unauthorized use of Henrietta Lacks cancer cells, the Havasupai tribe experience. The list goes on and on. And unfortunately, it also includes recent microaggressions in the systemic and institutional racism and implicit biases people of color face when seeking health care. Unfortunately, these acts have left a long lasting legacy affecting the willingness of people of color in particular to participate in potentially life saving research, and has caused some to even refuse to seek routine health care, refusing to take life saving medications and treatments for a wide ranging list of conditions. And vaccine hesitancy didn't just start with a potential COVID vaccine. Remember, only about 45% of American adults currently get vaccinated against the flu each year. And the influenza vaccine has been around a long time. So it's quite clear that there's a great deal of work that needs to be done now to rebuild trust. And we recognize that it won't happen overnight. But we also know that we have a lot of work to do to make sure that everyone understands that we have a long track record for developing life changing medications. And we are committed to placing science and safety over efficacy and politics in the development of the COVID-19 vaccine. But to bring this topic full circle, I, for one, am really excited to know that there are so many outstanding women in science working on all the dimensions of the COVID-19 vaccine discovery. And I'm thinking about scientists like Mexico's Susana Lopez Chariton and her work in understanding the coronavirus transmission. On our NIH is Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett, who at the age of 34 is leading the US government search for a COVID-19 vaccine. And I'm immensely proud of my Pfizer colleague, Katherine Jansen, who's leading Pfizer's work to discover and develop a safe and effective COVID-19 vaccine candidate. Together, all of us are stronger than this pandemic, and I'm confident that we will prevail, particularly with so many great women scientists leading the charge. So I've talked a bit about the problem, the need for more women joining, staying in, and scientific career. I've spoken a bit about my career and how I've had a driving commitment in my roles for advocacy. And as I close now, we just want to leave you with 3 personal seeds of triumph that I've planted that have helped me grow in my career development and leadership. Wisdom I've utilized to maintain my balance and sanity while on the metaphorical tightrope between working in, helping to lead, and adding value to a system and field of study that isn't always welcoming, while at the same time doing what I can to change it for the better. So, seed number 1, first of all, understand that life is not fair. Equal opportunity is not equal for everyone, and people may try to treat you differently because of your race or gender. I learned this a real life lesson very early on during my career, not only while treating patients who have been dealt a bad hand, but also in the rough and tumble environment as a woman in leadership. But the interesting thing about life is that although it may not come as soon as you would like, when you do the right thing, good things really do happen. And likewise, when you do the wrong thing, it always comes back to haunt you. You've all heard the saying, what goes around comes around. So, in the course of our lives, we're going to experience some form of racism, sexism, or unfair treatment. But if you're adding value, it'll almost be impossible for your positive efforts to go unnoticed. If you persevere, excel, exceed expectations, build relationships, and play well in the sandbox, I guarantee you that you will not only achieve a personal gratitude, but someone will eventually notice your efforts and you will be rewarded. So, seed number 2, don't mistake words for voice. I shared this tidbit in a New York Times interview that I did several years ago about women in leadership. While I believe fully in the words of the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg that women belong in all places where decisions are made, sometimes women feel that just because they have a seat at the table, or in the words of Lin-Manuel Miranda of Hamilton, just because they are in the room where it happens, that they must say something, anything. And while I do think it's important, particularly for women to get our voices in the room, in my opinion, it's also very important to know that having a real voice means developing a track record of thoughtful ideas, success, and accomplishments so that people actually want to hear what you have to say because they know that you will say something that may add significant value. We've all seen people who talk incessantly in meetings just to hear themselves talk, and trust me, it's not a good look. So don't mistake words for voice. Use your words and voice, but use them strategically. And the third seed and last seed, don't be afraid to chart your own career path. Consider non-traditional careers and never allow anyone to limit your ambition, your ability, or your achievements. As someone who's done it, I encourage everyone to take on roles outside of your comfort zone, roles that allow you to advance and organize your career so that you have the ability to see issues from different perspectives. As I've shaped my own career, I've found that health is like a prism, one that changes depending on how the light hits it. And so it is with any field. And it's worth considering how you can broaden your horizons by taking on roles outside of your field of specialization. I recognize this is difficult as the pace of science moves quickly and focusing on your field is challenging, but I've benefited greatly from taking leadership roles outside of clinical medicine and by working in situations that included turnarounds and crisis management. Too often, women are advised to stick to their specialties, and too often we allow others to put limits on what we do or want to do. It's time to forget about career ladders, or any of the other structures that have been used to limit women's progress. Run your own race. It'll be long, but hopefully a rewarding one. And the choices for growth have never been greater. Startups, organizations in transition, projects, and scientific collaborations of all types. So, in closing, I started today with a story about women in science. Let me end with one. Dr. Gladys Hobby was a microbiologist who earned her doctorate in biology at Columbia and worked for Pfizer from 1940 to 1959. She played an incredibly prominent role in two landmark achievements: the mass production of penicillin in the early 1940s and the 1950 discovery of the antibiotic oxytetracycline, which Pfizer marketed as terramycin. Both are still in use today. And like nearly all women of her era and others still today, she received little initial credit for her impact on science and health. And today it's clear that Gladys Hobby was one of the most influential microbiologists in the history of science. Her work has helped save millions of lives, and she joyfully encouraged young women scientists at her alma mater, Vassar. And to them, she once wrote, and I quote, "Each generation must recognize that its accomplishments are never sufficient or final, that change is inevitable, and that each new generation must be given the chance to express itself and mature," end quote. And she ended her note with a call to all women to help in that maturing and transition process. And that's a call I echo today. We must each run our own leg of the race, but we must also be mindful of how we plant the seeds of triumph and pass the baton to others in our quest to change and advance the culture for women in science. Because in so doing, we will be the giants whose shoulders the next generation will step up to and stand on, to the benefit of all. So I do hope something that I've shared with you today will empower, motivate, inspire, and light a fire within you to rethink possible and not just imagine, but actually do what you can do to create a more equitable and just world for women in science. It's been my absolute pleasure and an honor to share the afternoon with each of you. Thank you.
Wow, what an extraordinary way to start the Women in Science Day. That was really fantastic. And I know that it's going to really generate a lot of meaningful advice, particularly to our early career investigators, but really all of us who are attending this Women in Science forum today. As we're waiting for some questions to come in, Dr. Morgans and I would love to start with a couple of questions to you. I think one thing that was really impactful to hear about was being a breast cancer survivor yourself. I'm wondering if you could share how that affected you as well as your approach to work.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Yes, I was diagnosed with breast cancer at age 34, actually a month after my wedding to the love of my life in 1997. And as a new bride, I was writing thank you cards for wedding gifts, all while clumps of my hair were falling out as a result of the treatment that would ultimately save my life. Fortunately, hair grows back, but basically for treatment at the time, there were really 4 cocktails of IV chemotherapy, and one was worse than the other. And somehow people think that if you're a physician, you take this news better. I didn't. I was a steaming hot mess, and it didn't matter that my mom had lived through breast cancer. When I got my diagnosis, the first thing I thought was that I was going to die. And now remember, this was back in 1997 when treatment was very different than it is now. And, the survival rates for breast cancer were much lower. And the treatments were fewer and far less precise. And certainly if you were an African American woman under the age of 40, which I was at the time, everything I read said that I would be dead in 5 years. Well, fortunately, you can't believe everything you read. I was able to get the life-saving treatment and care that I needed. And thanks to many medical breakthroughs, innovative advances, and new treatments, doctors now have an arsenal of cancer treatments from which to choose. And because of many developments in medical treatments, the quality of life and survival, as you all know, it's much better for all cancers in general. And in terms of the impact, it impacted me in several ways. First, it gave me the realization that I, without a doubt, had picked the right partner because he was with me and by my side every step of the way in ways that were unimaginable. And few people are able to see what their spouse is made of up front, but I saw my husband's character, his strength, and his unconditional love from the outside of our marriage. And trust me, it's a wonderful piece of knowledge to have in your back pocket. But secondly, and I think and very importantly, cancer put things into perspective for me. We all use the phrase "tomorrow is not promised." I used it probably a bit too casually before my breast cancer diagnosis, but it certainly took on a new meaning after I was diagnosed. I was living in this beautiful, rosy world with a supportive family and friends and husband, as I shared in the talk. And I wanted to be a doctor. I became one. I wanted to have a non-traditional career, and I was doing that. I was on top of the world. I married the sweetest guy in the world. But my experience with breast cancer, my own personal brush with death, helped me to become laser focused on what truly matters. And it also fueled my passion to use whatever time I have left on this earth to make a difference in the life of others. And I say it often, in the words of Winston Churchill, mountaintops inspire leaders, but valleys mature them. And my breast cancer experience was a real valley. It matured me in ways that were unimaginable. And while I wouldn't wish it on anyone, it certainly made me a better wife, a better daughter, a better sister, a better friend, a better advocate, a better physician, and a better leader and caregiver.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
you're welcome.
What a wonderful take on something, a valley that I'm sure was very low. So I'm very glad that you were able to take all of that from that. One of the things that affects so many of us is imposter syndrome, and just feeling like we don't deserve to be here. No one really knows, but I can't actually do the things you think I can do. And this can be an issue for young women, for women throughout their careers, for anybody, frankly. And I'm wondering what your take is on the imposter syndrome, what your advice is to young women, to women of color, to all of us as we try to struggle with this.
First I want to say that imposter syndrome and feelings of self-doubt are normal for everyone, even the most confident among us. It's actually more common than people think, and in particular among high-achieving women. But we know that it also impacts men too, and it can affect everyone. Even people who seem to have it all together. We all have some level of self-doubt every now and then. There are some studies that suggest that more than 70% of all people experience imposter syndrome at some point in their life. And that's okay, because while well-earned self-confidence is a really good thing, you never really want to get too full of yourself and not learn from your setbacks. It's typically not a good look. So one way to deal with it is sometimes, simply just writing down your fears and acknowledging them on paper can help you move past them. It sounds simple, But there are studies that show that that helps. And similarly, reminding yourself of all that you've already accomplished can be very helpful. For a young investigator, maybe read an old letter of recommendation. But also for those of us who are older, review all of the amazing accomplishments on your resume. Actually make a list and a written record. Take in and celebrate all that you have accomplished to get you where you are and the hard work and dedication that got you there. And for me, it's always great to share how I'm feeling with a close friend or mentor when I'm feeling like things aren't going well, someone who knows me very well. You can even consider talking to a healthcare professional if it starts to get overwhelming, because you're thinking about it every day. But I really have a nice circle of family members and friends who are my go-to team, my own personal board of directors. And we have one rule, and it's a very important rule. We must keep it 100% with each other at all times. And that means, in addition to being a good sounding board for each other, we have to tell each other the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, even if it hurts sometimes. And at least for me, I always come away feeling much better after speaking to a member of my own circle. As women in leadership, as I've shared, it's a tough road. But I have to tell you, by having your own board of directors, recognizing and celebrating your own strengths, you can get through it, and you will, like many of us on this call have done.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I think you talked a lot about your own career trajectory and how that's influenced you as well as your personal life. And I wonder if you could go back in time and say to yourself at a young Dr. Dara, what advice might you give yourself? And how, I think that will be really impactful for our women in science to hear.
Well, first I'd say eat less, gain less weight, but no, okay, no, seriously, it's funny. One of the things that I'm struggling with still today, it's so important for leaders of all stripes, and particularly women, to strategically raise your hand and sign up for bold, out-of-the-box, non-traditional opportunities, as I mentioned in the talk. But somewhere along the lines, young Dr. Dara developed what I call a serious case of helium hands. This was actually a term that was coined by Dr. Pamela Peeke and described in a book that she wrote a while back called Body for Life for Women. And it refers to the phenomenon that many women, myself included, experience. And that is, we take on way too much. Our hands drift upwards almost involuntarily to sign up for yet another project, despite having an already full plate. So perhaps if I had known that the disease of helium hands was incurable as a young Dr. Dara, I might have not caught it, and I would have really developed a muscle to say no a little bit more often. I say this a little bit tongue in cheek, but I'm really serious. I've achieved a lot of success in my life, but work-life balance has not been my strong suit. And a lot of it has to do with my determination to succeed. And some is just the realities of being a woman of color. But the truth is, no one is expendable. It's just not healthy to always burn the candle on both ends. And remember, when you have helium hands and you say yes to everything, it may force you to have to say no to something that was perhaps more important. So at the end of the day, saying yes to everything leaves you exhausted. So I would just tell young Dr. Dara to definitely get in there, raise your hand, but be careful with the helium hands. Be very strategic about what you say yes to.
Yeah, no, I think that's excellent advice.
Wonderful. Well, let's change the direction to COVID-19. And I know that Pfizer has been working really hard to develop a safe and effective vaccine candidate that can really be a friend for all of us in the world. Can you share the latest efforts to really diversify the clinical trials and how this will help vaccine hopefully applicable to all people, regardless of race?
Oh, I'm happy to talk about that. First, just let me say that we have made intentional efforts to design our study at Pfizer in a way that is inclusive and meets the needs of potential study volunteers from all diverse backgrounds. And you may ask why. Well, if we don't, populations that are already underserved risk not benefiting from this potential medical breakthrough that could lead to even more pronounced health disparities. So to that end, we have been very intentional about selecting investigative sites in diverse communities that have been disproportionately affected by COVID-19. And this is to help ensure that individuals who've been most impacted have the opportunity to participate. We've worked with our investigators, the principal investigators, to make sure that they understand our commitment and the importance of recruiting individuals who fully represent the racial and ethnic diversity of their communities. And we've created friendly, patient, user-friendly materials that are easy to understand, that are translated into multiple language and are actionable. And we've engaged and are continuing to engage patient advocacy partners and trusted community groups and professionals to help us raise awareness and demystify and get rid of some of the myths that surround participation in clinical trials, but also that share the value proposition and the benefits of participation and representation. I'm happy to report that as of just yesterday, more than 39,000 participants have enrolled in our trial, and approximately 43% of the overall total and 29% of the U.S. participants have diverse backgrounds. And while our work is far from over, I have to say that this is really, really exciting and encouraging news, and it certainly represents a significant improvement in historic research participation from racial and ethnic minorities. So we're really excited about where we are.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I think that that's incredibly important when we think also the similarities of the populations impacted by COVID and prostate cancer and the challenges and importance of diversity in clinical trials across the board. So that's really wonderful to hear. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the Pfizer leadership projecting about the potential availability of the COVID-19 vaccine if it's authorized and approved.
Well, I would first love to direct people to our website. It's Pfizer.com. Our CEO, Albert Bourla, just put out a lovely note kind of laying out the proposed timeline for when we think that we would have a product, a candidate out there. But the short answer is if regulatory approval and authorization is obtained, the company currently expects to manufacture globally up to 100 million doses by the end of this year, and potentially approximately 1.3 billion doses by the end of 2021. But I do encourage you to go to our website, Pfizer.com. There's a letter on there where our CEO really outlines all the steps and everything that is required in order for us to have an available vaccine.
Fantastic.
So just one more question on vaccine before we are over with time. How are you able to move so quickly? How, in the past, vaccine development has taken at least a few years, if not a decade. So how is it that we're not even a year into understanding things that we see the movement that we do?
Well, first I just want to say, even though we are indeed moving at extraordinary speed, preservation of high quality and safety standards is absolutely critical and critically important throughout development. And I also want to say we're taking all of the regulatory and operational steps that we would normally take for all of our vaccine trials, maintaining the highest standards in our development process and not cutting any corners in our program. So how are we doing that? We're accelerating the development process by doing many of the operational steps in parallel rather than sequentially. For example, we began the investigator site selection process earlier than we typically would. We staffed up our team in advance to give our operations the support and flexibility they needed. In addition, we've invested upfront in certain areas such as manufacturing of the investigational product so that we're ready to execute quickly as decisions are being made. And also, as in the usual drug development journey, the process of preparing regulatory data packages to submit to the FDA and waiting for its response often takes months. But in the fight against COVID-19 across the globe, regulators are responding to this data very quickly, often in real time, to help keep trials running as quickly as possible. So there's a whole host of things that are changed, much like what we're doing now with this conference. I mean, we're in Zoom now. We're figuring out how to do things much more quickly and differently. And that's what we've been doing. But I just want to make sure that it's clear that even though we are moving with extraordinary speed, we are focused on safety first and foremost, and also effectiveness.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Well, I think I know we're wrapping up on time. This has been, first of all, I think your talk was really inspirational, and the comments that you've made regarding your own career trajectory, I know are going to really hit home with all of our participants. So thank you so much for launching this Women in Science Forum, and thank you again for being a part of this.
It has been my absolute pleasure. I wish you the very best for the rest of the conference. Just thank you for the honor of joining you today.
Thank you so much.